So, when you think about pistols, certain words probably come to mind. Precision, reliability, stopping power. They're tools designed with a very specific, very serious purpose. You expect them to be meticulously engineered, refined over generations to be as effective as possible. A good pistol should feel like an extension of your hand, something you can trust your life with. The design philosophy is usually function over form, where every curve, every piece of metal is there for a reason. It's all about creating that perfect balance of ergonomics, accuracy, and dependability. But what happens when that philosophy gets weird? What happens when a designer decides to throw the rulebook out the window and chase a radical new idea? Sometimes, you get a game changer. But other times, you get something else entirely. You get designs that are so bizarre, so impractical, or so fundamentally flawed, that they become infamous. These are the pistols that make you stop and ask, what were they thinking? They're the experiments that went wrong, the moonshots that never left the launch pad, and the solutions to problems that never really existed in the first place. Today we're diving into that world of weird. We're looking at 10 pistols that, for one reason or another, completely missed the mark. These aren't just bad guns, they're fascinating failures. They tell a story about ambition, innovation, and sometimes, just plain old bad ideas. Guns are usually built for precision and reliability. But these 10 pistols became legendary for all the wrong reasons. So, let's get into it. Alright, first up, let's travel back to the turn of the 20th century to Great Britain. This is the Mars automatic pistol. And look, the goal here was admirable. The British military was looking for a powerful new semi-automatic sidearm to replace their revolvers, and designer Hugh Gabbett Fairfax thought he had the answer. His answer was this absolute beast. The Mars was designed to be one of the most powerful handguns in the world at the time, chambered in a series of proprietary, neck-breaking Magnum cartridges. On paper this sounds impressive, a pistol with rifle-like power? What's not to like? Well, as it turns out, a lot. The first problem was the sheer size and weight of this thing. It was enormous, clunky, and just plain heavy. It wasn't something you could comfortably wear on your hip. It was more like something you had to lug around. So, right off the bat, the ergonomics were a complete disaster. It just didn't feel right in the hand, which is, a pretty big deal for a handgun. But the real issue, the thing that made the Mars infamous, was its action and recoil. It used a long recoil rotating bolt system that was incredibly complex. When you fired it, the barrel and bolt recoiled together for a huge distance, then the bolt unlocked, rotated, and ejected the spent casing right into your face. Seriously, the ejection pattern was notoriously unpredictable, and often sent hot brass straight back at the shooter. It was a mechanical nightmare that was prone to jamming and failure. And the recoil? It was brutal. Absolutely punishing. We're talking about a level of kick that made the gun nearly uncontrollable. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was painful. Test shooters at military trials, who were experienced soldiers, absolutely hated it. They reported that it was unpleasant to shoot and incredibly difficult to aim for follow-up shots. The recoil was so violent that it was said to have dislocated wrists. It was a gun that fought the user at every single step. So, you have a pistol that's too big, too heavy, ejects hot brass into your eyes, and has recoil that could injure you. It's no surprise the Mars was a massive commercial failure. It was never adopted by any military, and very few were ever made. It's the perfect example of a design that prioritized raw power over literally everything else. Usability, safety, and common sense. You wouldn't just need a holster for this thing, you'd need a gym membership and a good health insurance plan. Next up, we're jumping forward to the 1960s in the USA, a time of space-age optimism and futuristic design. And nothing says the future quite like a rocket-propelled pistol. This is the gyrojet. Instead of firing conventional bullets propelled by gunpowder, the gyrojet fired tiny, self-contained rockets called microjets. The concept was straight out of science fiction, a lightweight pistol with almost no recoil and very little noise, since the projectile was its own rocket engine. The design was revolutionary. The barrel didn't need to contain a high-pressure explosion, so it could be made of thin, lightweight metal with simple guide rails. There was no traditional ejection port, because the entire rocket casing left the barrel. This meant the gun could be incredibly simple and light. The lack of recoil was also a huge selling point. You could, in theory, fire it with extreme stability. It was so futuristic that it even made its way into the James Bond movie, You Only Live Twice, and later into video games. But here's where science fiction crashed into reality. The core problem was the rocket propulsion itself. Unlike a bullet, which has its maximum velocity the moment it leaves the barrel, the Gyrojet's rocket needed time to accelerate. This meant that at point-blank range, the projectile was moving so slowly that it had very little energy. It was famously said that you could literally dodge the bullet or even catch it if you were close enough. It was less of a weapon and more of a very dangerous, slow-moving projectile launcher. Accuracy was another massive issue. The spin stabilization from the angled rocket nozzles wasn't very effective, and the projectiles had a tendency to wander off course. The manufacturing of the rocket ammunition was also inconsistent, leading to frequent duds and variable performance. You'd pull the trigger and maybe you'd get a whoosh, or maybe you'd just get a disappointing click. It was a fundamentally unreliable system. For a weapon, that's kind of a deal breaker. Ultimately, the Gyrojet was a fascinating idea that was just too far ahead of its time, or perhaps just fundamentally flawed from the start. It offered a quiet, low-recoil shooting experience, but in exchange for abysmal reliability, terrible accuracy, and pathetic close-range effectiveness. It was a solution looking for a problem, a space-age fantasy that just couldn't compete with the centuries-old, proven technology of gunpowder. It remains a cool collectible and a movie prop, but as a practical weapon, it was a spectacular failure. So, you've got revolvers with their rotating cylinders, and you've got semi-automatics with their moving slides. For decades, those were your two main choices. But in the 1950s, an inventor named David Dardick looked at both and said, "I can do better." His vision was to combine the reliability of a revolver with the high capacity of a semi-auto. The result was the Dardick Model 1500, one of the most mechanically strange firearms ever conceived. The key to the Dardick was its ammunition. Instead of a traditional round, cylindrical cartridge, Dardick invented the Tround, a triangular-shaped plastic case. This wasn't just for looks, the shape was integral to the gun's function. The Dardick didn't have a normal chamber. Instead, it had a sort of open-sided, three-chambered cylinder that would rotate to pick up a Tround from the magazine, align it with the barrel, and then rotate again to eject it. It was like a revolver magazine hybrid. The idea was that this open-chamber system would be less prone to jamming than a conventional semi-auto's feed ramp. You could also load it quickly, like a magazine-fed pistol. And here's where it gets even weirder. The gun was modular. You could swap out the barrel and convert it from a pistol into a carbine. It was a system, not just a gun. Dardick had this grand vision of revolutionizing the entire firearms industry with his triangular bullets. Unfortunately, the revolution never came. The first big hurdle was the Tround itself. Nobody, and I mean nobody, wanted to switch to a proprietary, triangular-shaped ammunition that was available from exactly one source. The logistics were a nightmare. But even if you could get the ammo, the gun itself was a mechanical mess. The open-chamber design, meant to be reliable, was actually incredibly prone to getting clogged with dirt and debris, causing it to jam constantly. In the end, the Dardick was a commercial catastrophe. It was a wildly over-engineered solution to a problem that didn't really exist. The system was too complex, the ammunition was too weird, and the reliability just wasn't there. It tried to be the best of both worlds, revolver and semi-auto, but ended up inheriting the worst traits of both. It's a classic example of an inventor being so preoccupied with whether or not they didn't stop to think if they should. Now for something completely different. This is the FP45 Liberator, and honestly, it was never meant to be a good gun. In fact, its badness was part of the design. During World War II, the US military came up with a plan to arm resistance fighters in occupied territories. The problem was, you couldn't just airdrop thousands of high-quality rifles and pistols. It was way too expensive and logistically difficult. The answer was this: the cheapest, crudest, single-shot pistol imaginable. The Liberator was made from stamped sheet metal, had an unrifled, smoothbore barrel, and consisted of just 23 parts. It was produced for about $2.40 per unit, which is just insane. The manufacturing process was so simple that a factory could churn out thousands of them in a very short time. But the idea wasn't for a resistance fighter to use this thing in a prolonged firefight. The plan was much more grim and desperate. The pistol fired a single .45 ACP round. The user manual was literally a comic strip with no words, just showing how to load and fire it. The instructions were to sneak up behind an enemy soldier, use the Liberator at point-blank range, and then take the soldier's much better weapon. The Liberator was essentially a key to get a real gun. After that one shot, you could basically just throw it away. It was a disposable tool for assassination and acquisition, but calling it a tool might be, generous. The FP45 was notoriously difficult and dangerous to use. With its smoothbore barrel, it was wildly inaccurate beyond a few feet. We're talking can't hit the broadside of a barn from inside the barn levels of inaccurate. The ergonomics were non-existent. It was just a painful, uncomfortable piece of metal to hold. Reloading was a slow, deliberate process involving poking out the spent casing with a wooden dowel stored in the grip. In practice, the Liberator was probably more of a psychological weapon than a practical one. The idea of millions of these cheap, untraceable guns being dropped behind enemy lines was meant to create fear and paranoia among occupying forces. While many were produced, relatively few were ever actually dropped and used as intended. It stands as a testament to total war, a weapon stripped of all finesse and reduced to its most brutal, basic function: a single, desperate shot. It was more dangerous to the user than the enemy, but that was a risk the designers were willing to take. From one of the crudest pistols, we now go to one of the smallest. Meet the Kolibri, which is German for hummingbird. And yeah, that name is incredibly fitting. Produced in Austria around 1914, the 2mm Kolibri is officially recognized as the smallest commercially available centerfire pistol ever made. This thing is minuscule. It's so small that it looks more like a charm for a bracelet or a really detailed tie clip than an actual firearm. It was designed by an Austrian watchmaker named Franz Fanel, which honestly makes a lot of sense. The internal mechanism is incredibly intricate and tiny, like the workings of a fine timepiece. The gun fires a proprietary 2.7mm Kolibri cartridge, which itself is the smallest centerfire cartridge ever produced. The entire concept was to create the ultimate deep concealment vest pocket pistol for self-defense, in an era when carrying a small handgun was becoming fashionable. The craftsmanship is actually quite impressive. For its size, it's a relatively complex little semi-automatic pistol. But here's the problem. It's a victim of its own scale. The gun is so tiny that it's nearly impossible for an average-sized adult to hold and operate properly. The trigger is minuscule, the sights are basically non-existent, and manipulating the tiny slide and magazine is a masterclass in frustration. It's a gun that requires the dexterity of, well, a watchmaker. But the biggest failing point by far is the power, or rather, the complete lack of it. The tiny 2.7mm projectile weighs next to nothing, and leaves the barrel with pathetic velocity. We're talking about muzzle energy that's less than a powerful pellet gun. There are stories and tests showing the bullet failing to penetrate a thick piece of cardboard or even breaking the skin. As a self-defense weapon, it was utterly useless. You'd be better off just throwing the gun at an attacker. So what you have is a gun that's too small to operate effectively and too weak to do any actual damage. It's a beautiful piece of miniature engineering, a true curiosity, but as a weapon, it fails on every conceivable level. It's less of a self-defense tool and more of a novelty item for people who want to own the world's smallest. It's not a gun for shooting bad guys. It really is, as the joke goes, a gun for ants. Let's head back to the 18th and 19th centuries, a time of pirates, highwaymen, and general naval chaos. If you were a ship's captain or a bank guard, you might worry about being overwhelmed by a group of attackers. a single-shot flintlock pistol isn't great against a mob. So, some enterprising gunsmith came up with a solution, the duck's foot pistol. And yes, it's named that because it looks exactly like a duck's foot. This is a multi-barrel flintlock pistol, but unlike a simple double-barrel gun, the barrels are splayed out in a wide arc. The idea was simple, and on the surface, logical. You're one person facing multiple threats. You fire one shot, and you hit all of them simultaneously. It's an area denial weapon, a handheld volley gun, designed to deter a crowd with a single, terrifying blast. It was popular among naval captains, prison wardens, and anyone who expected to face more than one adversary at close quarters. The visual intimidation factor alone was probably pretty effective. Imagine being a mutineer and seeing your captain point this four-barreled monstrosity at you and your friends. You'd probably think twice. It projects an aura of "I can get all of you at once," which is a powerful message to send. And in the tight confines of a ship's deck or a narrow hallway, maybe, just maybe, it could work. But in practice, the duck's foot was a deeply flawed concept. The extreme splay of the barrels meant that it was completely useless against a single target. Unless that target was standing directly in front of the central axis, you were guaranteed to miss. To hit multiple targets, those targets would need to be standing in a perfect formation, conveniently spaced out to match the angle of your barrels. The odds of that happening in a real chaotic situation are basically zero. What's more likely is that you'd fire it and hit absolutely no one, while also potentially hitting innocent bystanders who happen to be standing off to the sides. It's a weapon of indiscriminate and largely ineffective fire, and like any flintlock, you only get one shot before you're stuck in a lengthy reloading process. So if you missed, which you probably would, you were then left with a very awkward, heavy club. It's a fascinating and cool-looking piece of history, but a classic case of a design that looks better on paper than it performs in reality. Okay, let's look at a gun designed for the shadowy world of espionage. This is the Semmerling LM4, developed in the late 1970s. It was created with a very specific user in mind: undercover agents and covert operatives who needed the most concealable pistol possible that could still fire a powerful cartridge. The LM4 is chambered in .45 ACP, the same round as the classic 1911, but it's absolutely tiny for that caliber. It's honestly one of the smallest .45s ever made. To achieve this incredibly compact size, the designers had to make a massive compromise. The Semmerling LM4 is technically a semi-automatic pistol, but it's not self-loading. It's actually a manually operated repeater. So, after you fire a round, you have to manually push the slide forward with your thumb, and then pull it back to eject the spent casing, and load a new round. It's a completely unique, and honestly, completely bizarre action. It has a magazine and it ejects casings, but you have to do all the work yourself, for every single shot. The thinking behind this strange design was that it prioritized concealability and first shot reliability above all else. Because the slide is locked until you manually move it, it's incredibly quiet when fired with a suppressor. There's no loud clack of the slide cycling. For a spy, that's a pretty big deal. The gun has no traditional safety. The long, heavy trigger pull and the manual action were considered safe enough. It was a tool for a very specific, niche purpose. But that niche was so small as to be almost non-existent. The manual action, while clever, is incredibly slow and awkward. In a high-stress situation, having to remember to cycle the slide with your thumb after every shot is a huge cognitive load. Your rate of fire is drastically reduced to maybe one shot every 2 or 3 seconds if you're well practiced. It completely negates the main advantage of a semi-automatic pistol, which is rapid follow-up shots. The Semmerling LM4 is a masterpiece of microengineering, but a failure as a practical firearm for almost anyone. A few were reportedly adopted by US intelligence agencies and special forces, but it never saw widespread use. For most applications, a small revolver or a conventional subcompact semi-auto was simply a better choice. The LM4 tried to be a silent, concealable powerhouse, but the slow, awkward manual action meant it defeated its own purpose as a defensive weapon. In the 1980s, the market for backup guns was booming. Police officers and civilians wanted a small, powerful pistol to carry as a last resort. Enter the COP .357 Derringer. COP stands for Compact Off-Duty Police. On paper, it seems like the ultimate backup gun. It's a 4-barrel Derringer that can fire powerful 357 Magnum rounds. 4 shots of Magnum power in a package smaller than a standard service pistol? That sounds like a winner. The design is certainly striking. It looks like something straight out of a sci-fi movie like Blade Runner. In fact, it was famously used in that movie. It's a solid chunk of stainless steel, giving it a very rugged, futuristic look. The action is a break-open design, similar to a shotgun, where all 4 barrels tilt up for loading and unloading. Instead of firing all 4 barrels at once like a duck's foot, it has an internal striker that rotates to fire each barrel sequentially with every pull of the trigger. So, you get 4 potent shots in a relatively compact package. What's the problem? Well, there are a few. First, compact is relative. While it's short, it's also incredibly wide and heavy for its size. It's a dense brick of steel that weighs about 2 pounds loaded. That's heavier than many full-size polymer-framed pistols. Carrying it as a comfortable backup gun was a challenge. It was a pocket anchor. But the single biggest complaint, the one that defines the COP .357, is the trigger. To cock and rotate the heavy internal striker mechanism, the trigger pull is absurdly heavy. We're talking in the range of 20 to 30 pounds. For context, a standard pistol trigger is around 5 to 7 pounds. Firing this gun requires a superhuman level of hand strength. It was so heavy that it made pulling the trigger smoothly and accurately almost impossible. Most people would yank the entire gun off target just trying to get it to fire. So while it offered 4 shots of 357 Magnum, you'd be lucky to hit anything with them. The combination of the brutal trigger pull and the stout recoil from the Magnum rounds in a small frame made it an incredibly difficult gun to shoot well. It was intended as a simple, reliable backup gun, but it was so hard to operate that you'd probably need a backup for your backup. It's a cool movie prop, but as a defensive tool, it was an exercise in frustration. Every major military power wanted its own semi-automatic pistol in the early 20th century, and Japan was no exception. Their first major attempt was the Nambu pistol, designed by Kijiro Nambu. This is the Type A model, often called the Grandpa Nambu. It was intended to be Japan's answer to the German Luger, and you can definitely see the aesthetic influence. It has a similar raked grip angle and elegant, if somewhat delicate, appearance. The Nambu was a passion project for its designer, and it was never officially adopted as the main service pistol by the Japanese military, though many officers purchased them privately. It introduced an 8mm proprietary cartridge that was fairly weak, even for the time, somewhere between a .380 and a 9mm. The gun itself was well machined and had some interesting features, like an adjustable rear sight and a grip safety. On the surface, it looked like a respectable first effort. However, the Nambu quickly developed a reputation for being problematic. The first issue was the recoil spring. There was only one, and it was weak, which often led to failures to feed and eject. The gun would jam frequently, which is the last thing you want in a military sidearm. The magazines were also a source of trouble. The magazine spring was weak, and the magazine body was fragile. Dropping a magazine could easily damage it and render the gun inoperable. But the most infamous feature of the Nambu is its safety, or rather its lack of a truly safe safety. The pistol had a grip safety, which is fine, but the design was notoriously unreliable. Worse, there was no way to safely decock the pistol once a round was chambered. The procedure for unloading involved carefully pulling the trigger, while holding back the cocking knob, which is an accident waiting to happen. And accidents did happen. The Nambu Type A and its successors became legendary in gun communities for all the wrong reasons. They were complex, fragile, underpowered, and prone to jamming and accidental discharges. While it has a distinct and recognizable look, it represents a series of poor design choices that prioritized form over function. It's a classic example of a first draft that really needed a lot more editing before it was ready for prime time. It's less of a reliable weapon and more of a historical meme. Last on our list is a pistol that was genuinely ahead of its time. This is the Heckler & Koch VP70 from 1970. The VP stands for Volkspistole, or People's Pistol. This gun has a huge claim to fame. It was the very first commercially produced pistol with a polymer frame. That's right, it beat Glock to the punch by over a decade. It was a forward-thinking design that also featured a high-capacity 18-round magazine. The VP-70 had another futuristic trick up its sleeve. It was designed to be used with a detachable shoulder stock that also served as a holster. When you attached the stock, it engaged a mechanism in the gun that enabled a 3-round burst fire mode. A polymer-framed, high-capacity machine pistol in 1970? That sounds incredible. It's no wonder it became an iconic weapon in video games like the Resident Evil series, where it was often one of the first special weapons you could find. So, a polymer frame, a huge magazine, and a burst fire option. Why isn't this gun hailed as one of the greatest of all time? Well, it comes down to one single, massive flaw: the trigger. The VP-70 is a double-action-only, striker-fired pistol. To keep the mechanism simple, the trigger has to do all the work of cocking and releasing the striker. The result is one of the worst trigger pulls in modern firearms history. It's incredibly long, heavy, and mushy. People describe the trigger pull as feeling like you're dragging a boat anchor through a sandbox. It's around a 15-pound pull, which is monstrously heavy for a pistol. This made the gun extremely difficult to shoot accurately in its standard semi-auto mode. You had this futuristic weapon platform that was basically crippled by a trigger that felt like it was designed as a form of punishment for the shooter. It was a fundamental design flaw that ruined the entire experience. And that burst fire mode? While cool in theory, the gun's light weight and high rate of fire made it virtually uncontrollable. It was more of a spray and pray feature than a practical combat tool. So, the VP-70 is a paradox. It was a visionary pistol that introduced concepts that would later become industry standards, but it was held back by a terrible trigger and a gimmicky burst mode. It was a glimpse of the future, but a very flawed and frustrating one to actually use. So there you have it. 10 pistols that, through ambition, weirdness, or just bad engineering, carved out a unique place in firearms history. From rocket guns and triangular bullets to pistols that were too small to hold or too heavy to fire, these designs show that the path of innovation is littered with fascinating failures. They're a reminder that a cool concept on a drawing board doesn't always translate into a practical, reliable tool. Sometimes, trying to reinvent the wheel just gives you a square. Each of these guns tells a story. They tell us about the design priorities of their era, the technological limitations they faced, and the wild ideas that designers were willing to try. They might have failed as weapons, but they succeeded in becoming some of the most talked about and memorable firearms ever created. They are the oddballs, the curiosities, and the cautionary tales of the gun world. They prove that sometimes, being legendary for the wrong reasons is its own kind of success. But that brings up the ultimate question. After seeing all the flaws, the quirks, and the downright dangerous features, what do you think? Would you ever trust your life to any of these pistols? Or are they just museum curiosities, best left behind glass? Let me know what you think down in the comments below. It's been Top. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.